Wow, wow, wow. The Indiana Fever have traded NaLyssa Smith and got Sophie Cunningham in a three-way trade.
Hold on, did the Indiana Fever really just trade NaLyssa Smith for Sophie Cunningham?
So the Indiana Fever just traded NaLyssa Smith and they got Sophie Cunningham.
This is a move that no one saw coming and fans are absolutely losing it. But what does this trade really mean for the Fever's future? Did they just make a championship-winning move, or did they give up too much for too little? And what does this say about their plans for Caitlin Clark? Stick around, because this trade isn't as simple as it looks. Indiana might be cooking up something big. Let's break it all down.
It was never going to happen because, Sophie Cunningham works so much with the Phoenix Suns that, she would be there. But I do have to say, Sophie Cunningham is a very, very, very...
And before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss a breaking update. So let's really break this down, because this trade is making waves across the WNBA. The Indiana Fever just pulled off a move that has fans either absolutely hyped or completely confused. And honestly, both reactions make sense. NaLyssa Smith, one of Indiana's young promising stars, is gone. In return, they bring in Sophie Cunningham, a hard-nosed, scrappy player who has built a reputation for being a gritty defender, a solid shooter, and someone you just don't want to mess with.
Smith and the 8th pick to Dallas. They get Sophie Cunningham and the 19th pick. So clearly, they do, whoever it is that is in with the number 8th pick, whoever it was at number 8, they were like, you know what, we don't really care. And they're getting a second-round pick. So my guess is that Sophie Cunningham, as far as I'm aware, is on a really team-friendly contract.
And let's not forget, they also gave up the 8th overall pick in this year's draft and only got back the 19th pick. On the surface, that might not seem like a great deal, especially since Smith was once seen as part of the Fever's future. So what's really going on here? Is this just a case of Indiana making a short-term move that won't pay off, or is there a bigger picture in play? Clip 5. The first thing we have to consider is why the Fever were willing to move on from NaLyssa Smith in the first place. Smith wasn't just some role player. She was a former number 1 second overall pick, someone who had high expectations.
Possibly can, but I think that Indiana had to kind of pay a little to get rid of NaLyssa Smith. As sad as that sounds, and boy, did they
place on her from the start. Coming out of Baylor, she was known for her athleticism, her ability to finish around the rim, and the potential to be an elite front court player. But potential is one thing, fit is another, and when you look at the Fever's roster, it starts to make more sense why they felt comfortable making this move. Ever since Aaliyah Boston arrived in Indiana, she has been the focal point of their future. She's their franchise big, their anchor in the paint, and the player they are building around. With Caitlin Clark now coming into the mix, the Fever are clearly trying to create a system that maximizes these two players. And when you start thinking about how Smith fit into that system, well, things weren't exactly smooth. Smith is a talented scorer, but she's not a natural stretch, for she isn't a three-point shooter who can consistently space the floor, which meant that at times Indiana's front court could get a little clogged when Boston and Smith were both on the floor. This led to some awkward lineups and forced the Fever to experiment with different rotations. And if you're trying to build a team around Boston and Clark, spacing is everything. Enter Sophie Cunningham. Now let's be real, Cunningham is not the better player overall compared to Smith. If you're looking at pure talent, Smith has more upside, but Cunningham fits better with what Indiana is trying to do. She's a floor spacer, someone who can knock down threes at a high clip and keep defenses honest. She's also a high-energy defender, a player who isn't afraid to get physical, talk trash, and do the dirty work. And let's not ignore one of the most underrated aspects of this move. Cunningham brings a toughness that Indiana desperately needed. Look, Caitlin Clark is about to enter the WNBA, and she's already one of the most talked about prospects in basketball history. Whether it's fans hyping her up, doubters questioning how her game will translate, or other players waiting to test her on the court, Clark is going to have a massive target on her back. The Fever know this. They know she's going to get some rough treatment from defenders, and they needed players around her who wouldn't just stand by and watch. That's where Sophie Cunningham comes in. She's one of those players who gets under her opponent's skin. She plays with an edge. She's fearless, and she's going to make sure no one takes liberties with her teammates. With her and Natasha Howard now on the Fever, opposing teams aren't going to be able to just run through Indiana and push Clark around. That kind of enforcer mentality matters in the WNBA, where physicality is a huge part of the game. So from a fit perspective, this move makes sense. But let's talk about the draft pick situation, because that's where some fans are Really questioning the trade, the Fever gave up the 8th overall pick in this deal, which is a pretty significant asset. Now, some people might look at this and say, well, the Fever already have enough young players, so giving up a rookie who might take time to develop isn't a big deal, and sure, there's some truth to that. Indiana is clearly in a win-now mode, and rookies, even talented ones, often take a few years to really make an impact, but still with Sophie Cunningham. Worth the 8th pick, that's where things get tricky, because let's be real, Indiana probably could have gotten more for Smith in the 8th pick if they really shopped around. Maybe they could have landed a higher profile player, or at least gotten back a future first-round pick instead of dropping all the way to 19th in this year's draft. That's the part of this trade that feels like a bit of a gamble if Cunningham ends up thriving in Indiana's system, and they land another key piece in free agency then. This trade could look brilliant, but if she struggles or they don't make the right moves with their newfound cap space, people will be asking why they gave up a lottery pick for a role player. And that brings us to another major aspect of this trade, the financial angle, because while the Fever technically didn't add a superstar in this deal, they did free up a ton of cap space. Cunningham is on a very team-friendly contract, around $100,000 per year, while Smith was on a bigger deal as a former high draft pick. That means Indiana now has a near-max slot available, which could be used to bring in another major player. So the real question now is, who are they targeting next? Because make no mistake, the Fever are not done making moves. This trade isn't just about Sophie Cunningham, it's about what comes next. And if Indiana uses this newfound flexibility to bring in another big-time talent, then this trade will start to make a lot more sense. The Fever have been linked to multiple potential targets, and now they actually have the ability to go after one. Maybe they make a run at a star free agent, maybe they try to swing another trade, or maybe they're eyeing a big signing next off-season, knowing that their championship window is about to open. One thing's for sure, this is a power move. The Fever are not content with just being competitive. They want to win, and they want to win now. They see Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston as their cornerstone pieces, and they are making moves to build around them in a way that maximizes their skill sets. That means surrounding Clark with shooters who can stretch the floor. That means building a defense that can protect her from getting overwhelmed by aggressive defenders. And that means making sure they have the financial flexibility to make more big moves in the future. So if you're a Fever fan and you're feeling unsure about this trade, I get it. It's a little shocking to see NaLyssa Smith go, especially since she was seen as part of the future not too long ago. But if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this move actually makes a lot of sense. Cunningham might not be a superstar, but she's a better fit for the Fever's current direction, and the cap space they open up could end up being the real key to this deal. So now we wait, because if the Fever pull off another big move in the coming weeks, this trade could end up looking like a masterstroke. If they don't, well, then we might be having a very different conversation either way. One thing is certain, the Indiana Fever are not playing around anymore. They are making moves, and they are making it. Clip 6. Very clear that they intend to compete now that we've broken down the initial shock of the trade and why the Indiana Fever made this move. Let's go even deeper into what this means for the team's future, because let's be real, this trade isn't just about bringing in Sophie Cunningham, it's about reshaping the Fever's entire strategy. If you're looking at the Fever's offseason moves so far, it's clear they have a plan. They aren't just trying to build a competitive team, they are trying to build a contender. While Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are still on their rookie contracts, and that's important because in the WNBA, rookie contracts are gold. Just like in the NBA, when you have elite talent on rookie deals, you have a small window to surround them with experienced veterans before you have to start paying them big money. Once those contracts expire, your flexibility decreases, and suddenly it becomes a lot harder to build a super team. That's why this trade matters so much. The Fever aren't waiting around for their young talent to develop. They make aggressive moves to win right now. Why Sophie Cunningham over NaLyssa Smith? At first glance, this seems like a downgrade. NaLyssa Smith was a high draft pick, a talented scorer, and someone who was supposed to be a key part of the Fever's front court for years to come. Sophie Cunningham, on the other hand, is more of a gritty role player, a shooter, a defender, and an energy player. But this trade wasn't about talent alone. It was about fit. Smith may have been a better pure player, but she wasn't an ideal pairing with Aaliyah Boston. She didn't stretch the floor well enough, and the Fever needed to surround Boston with shooters to maximize her impact. Cunningham fits that role perfectly. Not only does she bring three-point shooting, but she also brings a level of toughness and experience that Indiana needed. She's been on playoff teams, she's gone through battles, and she's the kind of player who brings intensity in every single night that matters. This isn't just about X's and O's, it's about men mentality. The Fever are going to be one of the most watched teams in the WNBA next season. They are bringing in Caitlin Clark, one of the most hyped prospects ever, and every team in the league is going to come after them hard. That means they need dogs on the roster. They need players who aren't afraid to mix it up, stand up for their teammates, and set the tone. That's exactly what Cunningham does, and let's not forget, she's not just a tough Player she can hoop too. She shot over 40% from 3 in Phoenix and has shown she can thrive in an up-tempo offense. That's important because with Clark running the show, Indiana is going to want to push the pace and play fast. Smith was more of a half-court player who needed the ball in her hands. Cunningham, on the other hand, is a catch-and-shoot weapon who will make life easier for Clark. And Boston did the